Hello and welcome. Today I will be discussing glucocorticoids. They're a type of hormone responsible for the regulation of metabolism and resistance to stress in the body. So today I'll be discussing their structure, their function, where they're located, and I'll also run through a typical negative feedback cycle to help explain how cortisol is released and the effects that this has on the body. So glucocorticoids are produced naturally in the adrenals. The adrenals are located superior to the kidneys in the retroperitoneal space. So each adrenal is comprised of two structures. So here, if you imagine a cut section of an adrenal, the middle area here is the adrenal medulla, and the outer section is the adrenal cortex, which is further divided into three zones. The middle zone is the zona fasciculata, and within the zona fasciculata is where the glucocorticoids are housed. So what is the function of glucocorticoids? Well, as the name suggests, glucocorticoids, they're responsible for releasing, the sugar glucose. They're associated with converting sugar, fat and protein stores to usable energy, inhibiting swelling and inflammation, and suppressing immune responses. So the glucocorticoids actually have the ability to increase the rate at which protein is broken down in the body, which increases the release of amino acids into the bloodstream. The released amino acids in the bloodstream is then used by the body cells for synthesis of new proteins, ATP production, energy production. Lipolysis, this is the breakdown of triglycerides and the release of fatty acids from adipose tissue into the blood. They've also got the ability to combat a range of stresses from exercise, fasting, extremes in temperature, surgery, trauma, disease, the list goes on. Glucocorticoids can make blood vessels sensitive to other hormones, which causes the vessels to constrict and in turn raises the blood pressure. So in instances of severe blood loss, this would become apparent. The powerful anti-inflammatory effects of glucocorticoids we must mention. They're very powerful anti-inflammatories, but also immunodepressive. So they lower the amount of lymphocytes in the bloodstream. This is also known as lymphocytopenia. So the glucocorticoids inhibit white blood cells and that participate in inflammatory responses in the bloodstream. They're useful in chronic inflammatory disorders such as rheumatoid arthritis. However, an excess amount of glucocorticoids in the blood has the effect of slowing down tissue repair and wound healing. Another example when cortisol would be prescribed on a regular basis would be an example of if somebody was to have an organ transplant. So in this example, the cortisol prevents the individual's own immune response from attacking and destroying the transplanted organ. So let's now have a look at how cortisol is regulated in the body. So as we mentioned, stress, a big stimulus for the release of glucocorticoids. So how does it all work? If we imagine that this is the hypothalamus here, this is the anterior pituitary gland, we've got what we call hypothalamic neurons, which release CRH, corticotropin releasing hormone, into the anterior pituitary gland, which stimulates cells to further secrete ACTH, adrenocorticotropin hormone, tropin meaning to release, adreno into the adrenals. So if that's the adrenal gland there, what we find in the adrenals is cortisol. So ACTH triggers the release of glucocorticoids, the most prominent being cortisol. So this will have the effect of the functions that I mentioned earlier, for example, lipolysis or the release of the breakdown of sugar into energy, etc. But what we don't want is too much cortisol in the bloodstream. So this is why this is a negative feedback system. So when the cortisol levels have raised in the bloodstream, instead of the ACTH continuing to be released by the CRH, and this cycle going on, the body is able to regulate when there is enough cortisol and inhibit the release of ACTH and inhibit the release of the CRH in the hypothalamus, thereby coming back to a state of equilibrium homeostasis. In conclusion, glucocorticoids are very important. They're helpful for the resistance to stress within the body and the regulation of metabolism. I hope this has been an informative video for you. Thank you for watching.